They say the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. He comes as everything you've ever wanted. For me, that was my husband, Ethan Sterling. We had the south of Houston Street loft, the Hamptons weekends, the life straight out of a magazine. I was 7 months pregnant with our first child, floating on a cloud of bliss. I believed our life was a fortress of love. But a fortress can be brought down by the smallest, most insignificant thing. In my case, it wasn't a wrecking ball that shattered my world. It was a single diamond stud earring, one that didn't belong to me. Life for Emily Sterling was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their duplex apartment in south of Houston Street wasn't just a home. It was a feature in Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a city that felt like their personal kingdom. The walls were adorned with art. She had personally selected a nod to her past life as a gallery curator before she dedicated herself to building a home with Ethan. Ethan Sterling was the kind of man who seemed sculpted from ambition and charm. At 35, he was a rising star in New York's cutthroat real estate development scene. He had a magnetic confidence that drew people in and a smile that could disarm the most hostile boardroom. To Mia, he was more than a provider. He was her partner, her best friend, the man who would kiss her growing belly each morning and whisper promises to their unborn son. They were in the final stages of preparing the nursery. It was a serene space, painted in soft shades of cloud blue and dove grey. A custom-built crib of solid oak stood in the center, and a mobile of hand-carved wooden animals hung above it, a gift from a trip to Vermont. Mia would spend hours in the plush rocking chair, one hand on her stomach, feeling the gentle flutters of the life inside her, and dream of the moment Ethan would place their son in her arms. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Ethan had said just last night, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stood admiring the room. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his hands mirroring hers on the swell of her belly. Everything is perfect. And it was, or so she believed. The illusion began to crack on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan had returned late from a business trip to Chicago, claiming exhaustion. He'd dropped his travel bag by the door, given her a perfunctory kiss, and headed straight for the shower. It was a small deviation from their usual routine. Normally he'd regale her with stories from the trip, his victories in meetings, the annoying clients. But she chalked it up to fatigue. As she unpacked his bag to do his laundry, a routine act of care she'd always performed. Her fingers brushed against something small and hard in the dop kit's side pocket. She pulled it out. It was a single earring, a small, elegant diamond stud set in platinum. Mia's heart gave a painful lurch. It wasn't hers. Her own jewelry was classic and understated, mostly gold heirlooms from her mother. She didn't own anything like this. She held the tiny object in her palm. It was so small, yet it felt as heavy as an anchor, pulling her down into a cold, dark place. Her mind raced desperately, searching for a logical explanation. A gift for her. Maybe a surprise. But Ethan was terrible at surprises. His excitement always gave him away. And why would a single earring be tossed carelessly into his wash bag? She walked into the bedroom. Ethan was out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, you," he said, smiling, though his eyes didn't quite leave the screen. "Hi," Mia replied, her voice strained. She held up the earring. "I found this in your bag. Is it a surprise for me?" She tried to sound playful, hopeful, but a tremor of fear laced her words. Ethan glanced up. For a fleeting microsecond, A flicker of panic crossed his face before his smooth, practiced composure took over. He chuckled a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, that. Must be something from the hotel cleaning crew. You know how things get mixed up in laundry services. I'll toss it." He reached for it, his movements a little too quick, a little too eager to dismiss it. But Mia didn't hand it over. She closed her palm around it, the sharp edges of the setting digging into her skin. A hotel cleaner's earring. A platinum-set diamond stud. It was a lie. A sloppy, insulting lie. "Right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The cleaning crew." She didn't press further. Not then. She knew instinctively that a direct confrontation would only be met with more lies, more gaslighting. Ethan was an expert negotiator. He could talk his way out of anything. But the earring was a crack in the facade of their perfect life, and as she lay in bed that night, feigning sleep, while her husband breathed evenly beside her, Mia felt a terrifying certainty. She had to look deeper. She had to know what was on the other side of that crack, even if she feared it would swallow her whole. The gilded cage had suddenly grown cold, and its golden bars felt like ice against her skin. The next few days were a master class in deception on both their parts. Mia played the role of the serene, expectant mother discussing baby names and Lamar's classes. Ethan played the devoted husband, attentive and affectionate, perhaps a little too much so. He brought her flowers for no reason, offered to give her foot massages, and complimented her pregnancy glow with a new fervor. It was a performance, and Mia was a captive audience to a play she never wanted to see. Her investigation began with a gnawing suspicion that felt like acid in her stomach. She started small, paying attention to his phone. It was now always with him, face down on the table or tucked into his pocket. The password, once a shared anniversary date, had been changed. When she casually asked about it, he'd waved it off. "New company security protocol. They're making us all use biometrics now." Another lie, smooth and plausible. The breakthrough, if one could call it that, came on a Friday night. Ethan was at a charity gala for his company. He'd sent her a picture of himself in his tuxedo, smiling broadly next to his boss with the text, "Wish you were here, beautiful. Thinking of you and our little man." Mia's heart ached. Part of her desperately wanted to believe him, but the earring in her jewelry box, hidden away like a dark secret, wouldn't let her. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline and dread, she went to his home office. They had a shared family iPad synced to his iCloud account. He often used it to review blueprints on a larger screen. She prayed he hadn't thought to log out. He hadn't. Her hands trembled as she opened the Messages app. The synced blue and grey bubbles began to populate the screen. And there it was. A thread with a name she didn't recognize, Chloe Vance. The messages went back months. "Chloe, you were amazing last night, still buzzing. Ethan. The feeling is mutual. Chicago was worth it just for that. Chloe, did you get home okay? Hope the wife didn't ask too many questions. Ethan. She suspects nothing. She's too busy nesting. The word nesting hit her like a physical blow. He was using her pregnancy, her love for their child, as a cover for his deceit. She scrolled further, her vision blurring with tears. There were photos, Chloe. A stunningly beautiful woman in her mid-20s, with sharp, ambitious eyes, posing in a hotel room. In one, she was wearing a single diamond stud earring. Mia's breath hitched. The messages were a nauseating mix of lust, logistics, and mockery. They talked about her, the pregnant wife, with a casual cruelty that stole the air from her lungs. Chloe was an intern at his firm, an overused line, so painful it felt like a parody. Mia sank to the floor, the cold hardwood a stark contrast to the fire of betrayal burning through her veins. The room spun. The perfect life, the loving husband, the happy family. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed set, and she was the unwitting, foolish lead actress. She wasn't just betrayed. She was a punchline in their sordid little affair. She sat there for what felt like hours, her hand protectively on her belly, as if she could shield her son from the poison that had just contaminated their world. A storm of emotions raged within her, white-hot anger, profound sorrow, and a terrifying, icy clarity. She couldn't stay. She couldn't bring a child into a home built on such a rotten foundation. When Ethan came home around midnight, humming a cheerful tune, she was waiting for him in the living room. The lights were off, save for a single lamp that cast long, ominous shadows. The iPad was on the coffee table, the screen lit up with his messages to Chloe. He saw it, and his jovial facade crumbled. The color drained from his face. For the first time since she'd known him, Ethan Sterling looked speechless. "Mia," he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Don't," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Don't you dare say my name. Don't you dare try to lie." "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, the classic pathetic defense of the guilty. "Not what it looks like." Mia stood up, her body shaking with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "You think I'm an idiot, Ethan?" I read everything. Chicago. The late nights at the office. Chloe Vance. The earring. You used my pregnancy, our son, as your alibi. The confrontation was brutal. He tried every tactic in his arsenal. First came the denials, then the minimization. It was a stupid mistake, it meant nothing, followed by blame shifting. Things have been so focused on the baby, I felt neglected. And finally the desperate pleading promises, "I'll end it. I'll do anything. Please, Mia, think about our family." But his words were hollow, meaningless. The trust had been atomized. There was nothing left to rebuild. "A family," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "This isn't a family. It's a sham. And I will not raise my son in a house where his father thinks so little of his mother that he would carry on an affair with his intern and laugh about it behind her back." She walked past him towards their bedroom. "I'm leaving," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Leaving? Where will you go?" he asked, a note of panic in his voice. It wasn't the panic of a man who was losing the love of his life. It was the panic of a man whose perfect image was about to be shattered. "You have nothing, Mia. Your name isn't on the deeds. The major accounts are all in my name. I support you. I support us." It was a threat veiled as concern. He was reminding her of her dependence on him. He thought he could control her with money. She stopped at the bedroom door and looked back at him, her eyes cold. "I may have nothing," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound steel. "But I have my dignity, and I have my son, and that is infinitely more than you will ever have." That night she packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the designer clothes, the expensive gifts, the entire curated life he had built around her. She took only her personal effects, the things from her life, before Ethan and the contents of the nursery. She wasn't just leaving a man. She was leaving a lie. And as she closed the door to the south of Houston Street loft for the last time, the silence that followed was the most honest sound she had heard in months. The yellow cab cut through the glistening, rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a beacon in the dark. Each bump and pothole was a jarring reminder of Mia's new reality. The life she knew had been contained within the opulent walls of the south of Houston Street loft. Now her entire world was packed into one suitcase and a few cardboard boxes filled with baby clothes and unassembled nursery furniture. Her destination was the one place she knew she would be safe: her best friend Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn. Sarah Miller was a no-nonsense journalist who had been Mia's college roommate and her anchor ever since. When Mia had called her, sobbing and incoherent, Sarah's response was immediate and unwavering. "I'm on my way." "No, don't wait. Just get in a cab. The spare room is yours." Sarah's apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in Park Slope. The contrast with Mia's former home was stark. Instead of polished concrete floors and minimalist furniture, there were worn wooden floors, overflowing bookshelves, and a cozy lived-in clutter that spoke of a life filled with books and deadlines, not galas and appearances. Sarah met her at the door, her expression a mixture of fury and profound sympathy. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply wrapped Mia in a fierce hug, held her while she cried, and then wordlessly helped her carry the boxes up the 4 flights of stairs. The following days blurred into a fog of grief and logistical nightmares. Mia felt hollowed out, a ghost haunting someone else's life. The spare room was small, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall, but it was a sanctuary. She would sit on the edge of the bed for hours, her hands on her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn son for the turmoil she had brought upon him. Ethan, of course, did not go quietly. Her phone was bombarded with his calls and texts. They cycled through the predictable stages: feigned remorse, angry accusations, and then desperate pleas. "Ethan. Mia. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. Ethan. You're being irrational. You're pregnant and hormonal. Don't throw our lives away. Ethan. I've ended it with Chloe. She's gone. Fired. It's over. It was always you. Ethan. Are you really going to do this? Raise our son in some stranger's apartment. He deserves his father. He deserves his home." Each message was a small, calculated cruelty designed to make her doubt herself. He tried to weaponize her pregnancy, her love for their child, against her. He even had his lawyer send a letter, a formal, intimidating document that spoke of parental rights and marital assets, subtly reminding her of how little she had in her own name. The sterling fortune, the empire he was so proud of, had been structured to protect him. Their prenuptial agreement, which she'd signed without a second thought in a haze of love, was ironclad. It entitled her to a modest, one-time settlement, enough to live on for a year or two, but a pittance compared to his wealth. He had designed their life to ensure she could never leave. Mia showed the letter to Sarah, her hands shaking. "He's right," Mia whispered, the fight draining from her. "What am I going to do? I'm 7 months pregnant. I have no job, no savings to speak of." Sarah snatched the letter from her, her eyes blazing. "No, we are not doing this. He's a coward trying to scare you. You are the smartest, most resourceful person I know. You were a brilliant curator before you met that parasite. This isn't the end, Mia. This is a reboot." Sarah became her fortress. She fielded the calls from Ethan, blocking his number. She made sure Mia ate, even when grief had stolen her appetite. She set up a consultation with a fierce female divorce lawyer who looked at Ethan's letter with a predatory grin. "Oh, he wants to play hardball," the lawyer, Ms. Diaz, had said. "Good. I love a challenge." Despite this bubble of support, Mia felt an overwhelming sense of vertigo. Her future, once a brightly lit path, was now a terrifying void. The stability she had taken for granted was gone. One day she was planning a baby shower with a guest list of New York's elite. The next she was applying for Medicaid and trying to figure out how to assemble a second-hand crib in a room barely big enough to hold it. The shame was a constant, suffocating companion. The friends she shared with Ethan, the society women she'd had lunch with, were now a source of anxiety. Whose side would they take? She could imagine the whispers, the pitying looks. Poor Mia. He left her while she was pregnant. Or worse, she must have done something to drive him away. To protect herself, she isolated herself, her world shrinking to the confines of Sarah's apartment. One afternoon, a week after her escape, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, forwarded from her old address. It was addressed to Emily Sterling, née Emily Croft. The use of her maiden name was jarring. The return address was a prestigious law firm she'd never heard of, Finch, Blackwood and Associates, with an address on Park Avenue. She assumed it was another legal threat from Ethan, sent through a different firm to intimidate her. With a sigh of dread, she tore it open. But the letter inside was not from Ethan. It was a formal, somber notice that began with words that made no sense to her. Dear Miss Croft, it is with regret that we inform you of the passing of your maternal grandfather, Mr. Sebastian Blackwood. Mia stared at the name. Sebastian Blackwood. She had no grandfather named Sebastian Blackwood. Her mother, Eleanor Croft, had been an orphan, a struggling artist who had died when Mia was a teenager. She had been Mia's whole world, and her story had always been one of solitude, of having no family to speak of. The letter continued speaking of a last will and testament, and requesting her presence for a private reading. It referred to her as the sole surviving heir. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error, someone with a similar name. Confused and dismissive, she tossed the letter onto the small desk in the corner. It was just another piece of paper in a life that had suddenly become overwhelmingly complicated. She had a divorce to navigate, a baby to prepare for. She had no time for administrative errors or ghosts from a past that wasn't hers. She had no idea that the letter she had just discarded was not an error, but a key that was about to unlock a door to a life beyond her wildest, most grief-stricken imagination. The letter sat on the desk for 2 days, an elegant, creamy enigma in the cluttered corner of the spare room. Mia tried to ignore it, focusing on the immediate, tangible problems in front of her, finding a new obstetrician, researching affordable childcare, and battling the waves of nausea that were a symptom of both her pregnancy and her profound stress. But the name on the letter, Sebastian Blackwood, echoed in her mind. It felt important somehow. On the 3rd day, propelled by a mixture of curiosity and Sarah's relentless encouragement, what if it's not a mistake? The worst that happens is you waste an hour. Mia called the number at the bottom of the page. A polite, formal secretary answered. When Mia gave her name, the woman's tone shifted immediately, becoming deferential and warm. Miss Croft. Yes, of course. Mr. Finch is expecting your call. Please hold. A moment later, a calm, resonant voice came on the line. Miss Croft. This is Alistair Finch. Thank you for calling. I am so very sorry for your loss. I think there's been a mistake, Mia said quickly. My mother was an orphan. I don't have a grandfather. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Your mother was Elena Croft, was she not? An artist specialized in watercolor landscapes. Mia's heart skipped a beat. Yes. How did you know that? Ms. Croft, Mr. Finch, said, his voice gentle but firm. There is no mistake. Sebastian Blackwood was your grandfather. It is a complex family history and I believe is best discussed in person. Could you possibly come to our offices tomorrow morning? The next day, Mia found herself standing before a towering limestone building on Park Avenue, a world away from Sarah's Brooklyn walk-up. The offices of Finch Blackwood and Associates were the epitome of old-world power and wealth. The lobby was hushed, clad in dark mahogany and polished marble. Alistair Finch was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes, a perfectly tailored suit, and an air of quiet authority. He greeted her, not with a handshake, but with a small, sympathetic bow of his head, gesturing for her to sit in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his enormous desk. The desk itself was a historical artifact, and behind it a large window offered a commanding view of Central Park. "Tea water?" he asked. Mia shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. Mr. Finch began to explain, his voice weaving a story that felt like something out of a novel. Sebastian Blackwood, he told her, was a titan of industry, a reclusive billionaire who had built an empire in shipping and logistics from the ground up. He was a hard, uncompromising man. His only child was a daughter, Eleanor. "Your mother, Eleanor," Mr. Finch said, his gaze softening, "was a free spirit. She had the soul of an artist, not a businesswoman. She fell in love with a man. Your grandfather deeply disapproved of a fellow artist, your father. Sebastian gave her an ultimatum: end the relationship and take her place in the company or be cut off entirely. Elena, as you might guess, chose love. She chose her art. She walked away from everything." Mia listened, stunned into silence. Her mother, the woman who had stretched every dollar who bought her art supplies from discount bins, was the heiress to a fortune. The story she had been told, that her mother was an orphan with no family, had been a shield. A story to protect a young girl from the pain of being rejected by her own father. They never spoke again. Mr. Finch continued, a note of sadness in his voice. Sebastian was a proud, stubborn man. He followed her life from a distance through private investigators. He knew about you. He knew when your father passed away, and when Elena herself fell ill. His pride, I believe, was his greatest regret. He never reached out. He couldn't bring himself to admit he was wrong. Tears streamed down Mia's face. Tears for the mother she had lost and for the hardship she had endured, all because of a rich man's pride. "Sebastian passed away last week at the age of 94, Mr. Finch said, sliding a thick leather-bound document across the desk. He spent the last decade rewriting his will. He left everything, his entire estate, his company, his portfolio, to his only living descendant. To you, Emily." Mia stared at the document. "Everything. What does everything mean?" Alistair Finch took a deep breath. "It means Blackwood Shipping, which is valued at approximately $9 billion. It means a real estate portfolio that includes properties in New York, London, and Geneva. It means a controlling interest in a dozen other corporations. And it means a liquid investment portfolio that, well, it's a considerable sum. Conservatively, Ms. Croft, your inheritance is valued in the range of $12 billion. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't even register. $12 billion. It was a concept, not an amount of money. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Mia gripped the arms of the chair to steady herself, her mind reeling. Just a week ago, her biggest fear was how she would afford diapers. Her millionaire husband had tried to intimidate her with his wealth, reminding her that she had nothing. Now she was holding a document that made Ethan's entire fortune look like pocket change. I don't understand," she stammered. "You don't have to understand it all today," Mr. Finch said kindly. "My role is to guide you through this. Sebastian left specific instructions. He wanted you to have the power and the resources he denied your mother. He saw this as his only way to atone for his mistakes." He explained the next steps. There were assets to be transferred, trusts to be managed. He spoke of the main residence, a sprawling 100-acre estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, which was now hers and ready for her to move into. Mia left the office in a daze. She walked for blocks without seeing the city around her. The noise, the crowds, the yellow cabs, it all faded into a dull roar in the background of the explosion that had just gone off in her life. She wasn't just a wronged wife anymore. She wasn't a charity case living in her friend's spare room. She was an heiress. The weight of that title was both terrifying and electrifying. The void she had been staring into was suddenly filled with an impossible, blinding light. She didn't know what this new life would look like or who she would become in it. But as she placed a hand on her belly, she knew one thing for certain. Her son would never want for anything. And his father, Ethan Sterling, was about to get the shock of his life. The drive to the Blackwood estate in Greenwich was a surreal journey from one reality to another. A discreet black car sent by Mr. Finch whisked her out of the city's grit and into the manicured autumnal splendor of the Connecticut countryside. They passed through a pair of imposing wrought-iron gates, the name Blackwood artfully twisted into the metal, and proceeded down a winding, tree-lined driveway that seemed to go on for miles. And then the house came into view. House was an inadequate word. It was a fortress of stone and glass, a magnificent Gilded-Age mansion that sat atop a hill commanding a view of sprawling lawns, a private lake, and the distant shimmer of the Long Island Sound. It was beautiful, imposing, and utterly intimidating. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance, the front doors opened and a small uniformed staff assembled. An older woman with kind eyes and perfectly coiffed grey hair stepped forward. "Welcome home, Miss Croft. I am Mrs. Gable, the household manager. We are all so pleased to have you here." The next few hours were a blur of introductions and explorations. Mrs. Gable led her through a fraction of the house, a grand ballroom, a 2-story library filled with leather-bound books, a formal dining room that could seat 50, and a sun-drenched conservatory filled with exotic plants. Every surface gleamed, every detail was perfect. It was less a home and more a private museum. Her personal suite of rooms was larger than Sarah's entire apartment. It included a bedroom with a fireplace, a sitting room, a vast marble bathroom, and a walk-in closet the size of a boutique. Most importantly, it had an adjoining suite of rooms fully furnished and decorated that Mrs. Gable referred to as the nursery wing. Sebastian Blackwood, the cold, distant man who had disowned his daughter, had built a nursery for a great-grandchild he knew he would never meet. It was a gesture of hope and regret, so profound it brought tears to Mia's eyes. But this new life was not just about opulence. It was about the crushing weight of legacy. Alistair Finch arrived that evening to begin the true orientation. He spread out files and portfolios on a massive table in the library. He explained the structure of Blackwood Shipping, the philanthropic obligations of the Blackwood Foundation, and the complexities of managing such vast wealth. "Sebastian wasn't just a rich man, Emily," Mr. Finch explained, using her first name for the first time. "He was a builder. He built an empire, and he has now handed you the crown. What you do with it is up to you." The pressure was immense. Mia felt like an imposter, a girl playing dress-up in a queen's robes. She had curated art galleries, not corporate takeovers. She knew about impressionism, not international shipping logistics. In the days that followed, she began to piece together a portrait of the man whose legacy she had inherited. She found his private study, a room left untouched since his death. It was filled with maps, ship models, and the scent of old paper and tobacco. On his desk was a single, silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of her mother, Elena, as a young woman, smiling with paint smudged on her cheek. He had kept it all these years. In a locked drawer, she found a collection of journals. They were her mother's, sent back to Sebastian by her landlord after her death. He had kept them, but had he ever read them? Mia spent her nights reading her mother's words, discovering the woman she had only known through a child's eyes. She read about her mother's love for her father, her passion for art, and the deep, abiding pain of her family's rejection. "I see his face in the society pages sometimes," Elena had written in one entry. "He looks older. So stern. Does he ever think of me? I chose my own life, my own love, and I don't regret it. But there is a part of my heart that will always be a soul-empty room, a room that only a father's love could have warmed." Reading those words, Mia's mission began to crystallize. This inheritance wasn't for her. It was for her mother. It was a chance to live the life of security Eleanor had been denied, and to reshape the cold corporate Blackwood legacy into something warmer, something more aligned with her mother's spirit. The money wasn't the point. The power was. The power to create, to help, to build something meaningful. She started to take control. She held her first meetings with the board of the Blackwood Foundation, surprising them with her incisive questions and her clear vision. She wanted to shift its focus from funding sterile hospital wings to creating massive arts endowments and scholarships for underprivileged artists, the kind of program that would have changed her mother's life. She began to transform the imposing mansion into a home. She had flowers from the estate's greenhouse placed in every room. She opened the heavy drapes to let in the light. She instructed the chef to prepare simpler comfort foods instead of fussy formal meals. She was no longer Emily Croft, the scared, abandoned wife. She was Emily Sterling-Blackwood, and she was stepping into her power. Her transformation was not lost on the outside world. The news of Sebastian Blackwood's mysterious heir had broken in the financial press, and speculation was rampant. And it was only a matter of time before that news reached the one person whose world was about to be turned completely upside down, her soon-to-be ex-husband, Ethan Sterling. Ethan Sterling found out about Mia's inheritance the same way the rest of the world did, through a headline in the Wall Street Journal. The article, titled "The Blackwood Enigma Reclusive Billionaire Leaves $12 Billion Empire to Unknown Granddaughter," was accompanied by a grainy, decade-old photo of Mia from her days as a gallery curator. He read it once then, twice the coffee cup in his hand, trembling so hard it rattled against the saucer. It was impossible. A joke. Mia, the quiet, artsy girl from a middle-class background, an heiress to one of the country's largest private fortunes. His first reaction was disbelief, followed swiftly by a tidal wave of incandescent rage. Not the rage of a man who missed his wife, but the fury of a gambler who had folded a royal flush, thinking it was a worthless hand. He had cast her aside, believing her to be a liability, a dependent he could easily control and discard. He had tried to intimidate her with his millions, and now those millions felt like dust. His mind, ever the calculator of assets and leverage, went into overdrive. His son. Mia was carrying his son. That was his connection, his way in. Their child was the heir to the Blackwood fortune. His strategy shifted instantly. The threatening lawyer's letters stopped. The angry, manipulative texts were replaced by a deluge of saccharine, desperate voicemails. "Mia, my love, I just heard. I am stunned. Why didn't you tell me? This doesn't change anything between us. I love you, not your money. I made a terrible mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake. Let me come home. Let's be a family. Our son deserves to be raised by both his parents in a loving home." Mia listened to the first voicemail in the library of her new home, Alistair Finch, sitting opposite her. His expression unreadable. She played it on speaker, and when it was finished, she deleted it without a word. Ethan, however, was relentless. When his calls went unanswered, he escalated. He showed up at the gates of the Greenwich estate, demanding to see my wife. The security team, pre-briefed by Mr. Hetkum, Finch politely but firmly turned him away. He tried to get to her through Sarah, who told him in no uncertain terms where he could go. Finally, he reverted to the only language he truly understood, the law. He hired a team of aggressive litigators. A new wave of legal documents arrived, but these were far more audacious. He was petitioning for an emergency reconciliation order, claiming his pregnant wife was being unduly influenced by third parties, and was not in a sound state of mind to make decisions about their marriage or her newfound assets. He was demanding joint control over all financial decisions related to their unborn child's future inheritance. It was a breathtakingly greedy, desperate gambit. The legal battle that ensued was short and brutal. They met in a sterile conference room at Ms. Diaz's law firm in Manhattan. Ethan and his lawyers sat on one side of a long mahogany table, radiating smug confidence. Mia sat on the other, flanked by the razor-sharp Miss Diaz and the formidable calming presence of Alistair Finch. Ethan tried to speak to her directly, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Mia, this is madness. Let's stop this. Think of our son." Before Mia could respond, Ms. Diaz slid a document across the table. "My client has thought of her son, Mr. Sterling, which is why she is proceeding with the divorce on the grounds of adultery. We have affidavits, text messages, and credit card receipts proving your affair with Ms. Chloe Vance. We are prepared to make them public record." Ethan's face tightened. "Furthermore," Ms. Diaz continued, her voice like ice, "let's discuss the prenuptial agreement you had my client sign. It's quite the document. It specifically states that all inherited assets pre- or post-marriage remain the sole and separate property of the individual who inherits them. You drafted it to protect your little real estate millions from her. It seems you were quite thorough, and we thank you for that." The color drained from Ethan's face. The very shield he had built to protect his wealth had now become Mia's impenetrable fortress against him. He was trapped by his own arrogance. Alistair Finch spoke for the first time, his deep voice filling the room. "Mr. Sterling, let me be perfectly clear. You have no claim on the Blackwood estate. None. Your attempts to declare Ms. Sterling-Blackwood incompetent are not only baseless but frankly defamatory. If you continue this course of action, we will respond with a lawsuit that will tie you and your company up in litigation for the next decade. We will scrutinize every deal, every permit, every tax return. The Blackwood resources, as you can imagine, are virtually limitless. It was a declaration of war he could not possibly win. His millions against her billions, his hubris against her resolve. The fight went out of him. He slumped in his chair, a deflated man. The charm, the confidence, the swagger. It was all gone, stripped away, to reveal the small, greedy man underneath. He looked at Mia, truly looked at her for the first time in this new context. She wasn't the pliant, adoring wife he had married. Her pregnancy gave her a maternal gravitas, and her eyes held a new, steely strength. She was powerful. She was untouchable. And he had lost her. He had thrown her away. Just give me what the prenup says, he mumbled to his lawyer, defeated. And visitation rights. I want to see my son. Mia finally spoke, her voice clear and steady, with no trace of the tremble he remembered. You will have supervised visitation, Ethan, and you will pay child support, as stipulated by the state of New York. My son will know who his father is, but he will be raised in a house built on truth and respect, not lies. He had no response. He had come here expecting to fight for a piece of a billion-dollar pie. He was leaving with the crumbs he himself had laid out, a stark and humiliating reversal of fortune. As Mia stood up and walked out of the room, leaving him in the wreckage of his own making, she didn't look back once. The divorce was finalized, not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with the sterile click of a mouse. The final decree arrived as a secured PDF in an email from Miss Diaz. Mia sat in her grandfather's study, the room she had now claimed as her own, and digitally signed the document that officially dissolved the Sterling marriage. There was no pain, no lingering regret, only a profound and cleansing sense of relief, as if she had finally shed a heavy, ill-fitting coat. Ethan was now legally a stranger, a ghost from a past life. He tried one last time to breach her walls with a long, rambling email that swung wildly between bitter accusations and pathetic nostalgia. Mia read the subject line, "For the sake of what we had," and moved it to the trash folder without opening it. She would not allow his poison to touch her new world. Her focus was singular, aimed entirely at the new life stirring within her. 2 weeks before her due date, in a private suite at a top New York hospital, a world away from the crowded clinics she had been researching just months before she went into labor. Sarah was by her side, a fierce and constant presence, holding her hand, wiping her brow, and cursing Ethan's name with a creative fury that made Mia laugh through the pain. Alistair Finch, ever the loyal guardian, waited in the family lounge, looking more anxious than he ever had during a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. After 14 hours of grueling effort, a final primal push brought her child into the world. The doctor's announcement came as a gentle surprise. "It's a girl, Emily. You have a beautiful daughter." A girl. Mia had been so convinced it was a boy, so wrapped up in Ethan's narrative of his son and heir. A daughter felt like a gift from the universe, a definitive break from the past. As the nurse placed the tiny, wailing infant on her chest, Mia looked into a pair of wide, dark eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the world, and she felt the last fractured pieces of her old self click into place. She was whole again, but remade into something stronger. "What's her name?" Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mia kissed her daughter's downy head, inhaling the sweet scent of new life. "Lily Hope Blackwood," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily for the flower that symbolizes rebirth and resilience. Hope for everything this child represented. And Blackwood, a name of strength, a name she was reclaiming from the cold grip of a patriarch, and redefining with a mother's love. The name Sterling was consciously, purposefully erased. It had no place in their story. In the months that followed, Mia's transformation from heiress to matriarch was swift and decisive. Her first major test came at her inaugural meeting as chairwoman of the board of Blackwood Shipping. She walked into a boardroom filled with a dozen silver-haired men in bespoke suits, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep skepticism. They saw a young pregnant woman who had inherited a position she hadn't earned. They were expecting a figurehead, someone they could easily manage. They were mistaken. Mia, dressed in a simple but elegant maternity dress, took her seat at the head of the table. She listened patiently as they presented their quarterly reports, filled with talk of profit margins and shipping tonnage. When they had finished, she didn't offer polite applause. She opened a folder and began to speak, her voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority. She spoke of her vision, not of dismantling her grandfather's legacy, but of evolving it. She laid out a multi-year plan for transitioning the Blackwood fleet to greener fuel sources, for implementing better labor practices for their crews, and for using their logistical network to aid in international disaster relief. One of the older board members, a man named Mr. Harrington, who had been her grandfather's contemporary, scoffed lightly. "Ms. Blackwood, with all due respect, our fiduciary duty is to our shareholders, not to saving the planet. Sebastian built this company on ruthless efficiency." Mia met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "Mr. Harrington, my grandfather built this company in the 20th century. We are now living in the 21st. Ethical and environmental responsibility are no longer liabilities. They are the cornerstones of a sustainable future. A company that fails to adapt will fail to exist. My fiduciary duty is to ensure Blackwood Shipping thrives for the next 100 years, not just the next fiscal quarter." Her command of the subject was absolute, her resolve unshakable. A stunned silence fell over the room, followed by a grudging but palpable shift in respect. Her true passion, however, was reserved for her mother's legacy. The newly christened Eleanor Croft Blackwood Foundation became her life's work. She didn't just write checks from an office. She was hands-on visiting the programs she funded. She stood in a drafty warehouse in the Bronx that had been converted into a vibrant arts collective, watching a young woman with paint-streaked hands create a mural of breathtaking beauty. The artist, a scholarship recipient, reminded Mia so much of the pictures of her own mother. This was not charity. It was justice. It was giving these brilliant, struggling creators the security and support her own mother had been so cruelly denied. Ethan, meanwhile, drifted further into irrelevance. The supervised visitations were a stark, painful tableau of his new reality. Once a month, he would sit in a bright, soulless room in a family center, awkwardly trying to hold a baby who regarded him with the same placid indifference she gave any other stranger. Maya would watch for a few minutes from behind a one-way mirror, not with anger, but with a distant clinical pity. He was a man who had traded a universe for a trinket, and the crushing weight of his miscalculation was etched onto his face. On the evening of Lily's first birthday, Mia stood on the grand stone terrace of the Blackwood estate. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the Long Island Sound in hues of rose and gold. Lily, sleepy after a day of celebration, was nestled in her arms, her small hand curled around Mia's finger. She thought back to the woman she was just 2 years ago, a woman whose entire identity was Ethan's wife. That woman had believed her perfect life was a fortress, only to discover it was a beautifully decorated prison. The betrayal had shattered her, But in the wreckage, she had found a foundation of iron she never knew she possessed. She had lost a husband who saw her as an accessory, but she had gained a legacy, a purpose and a love for her daughter that was more real and powerful than anything she had ever known. Ethan had his millions. Mia had a dynasty. He had a life of superficial pleasures. She had a life of profound meaning. She looked down at her daughter's sleeping face and felt a sense of destiny settle over her, as vast and deep as the darkening sky. She wasn't just Sebastian Blackwood's heir, fulfilling an old man's quest for redemption. She was the first in a new line. The Blackwood legacy, once a symbol of cold masculine power and regret, would now become a matriarchy, one built on creativity, compassion, resilience, and hope. She tightened her hold on her daughter, her heart full. Her reign was just beginning. Emily's story is a powerful reminder that the end of a chapter is not the end of the book. She walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not just a survivor, but a queen who built her own throne. Her journey from a heartbroken pregnant wife trapped in a lie to a self-assured billionaire matriarch shows us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. She lost a husband, but she found herself, her heritage, and a power she never knew she had. Her story isn't just about money. It's about the priceless value of self-worth. What did you think of Emily's incredible transformation? Could you have been as strong as her in that situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If her story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more true life stories of overcoming adversity and finding incredible strength, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.